sounds easy enough, but in truth, it's just not as simple as saying, I want to make a change. Intent is important, yes, and it's a very critical first step. But to turn intent into action, and by that I mean real, lasting action, takes more. And most of the time, it's just simply impossible to do it on your own because of deep seated subconscious limiting beliefs you probably don't even know you have. My guest today, coach, author, consultant Heather Elliott, knows this firsthand. And now she helps people make that internal shift through her process called mindful change. She's here to tell us how it works and the results it could bring. So, welcome to the Dream Power Show, Heather.
Thanks, Debbie. Good to be here.
Oh, and my pleasure as well. Your practice touches on a concept that a lot of people probably have heard of, but maybe they don't totally understand it, and that's called mindfulness. So, can you give us your definition of mindfulness and how it relates to what you do?
Sure. There's a lot of, I want to say a lot of play with the word mindfulness right now. They use mindfulness in terms of yoga practice. They use mindfulness in terms of meditation. And what they're referencing there is quieting the mind and getting to that clear space where the chatter of everyday life doesn't kind of yammer at you all the time. So that's sort of the standard definition of mindfulness. In my work, mindfulness refers to actually stepping outside of your mind to become an observer of it so that you can become more aware of what it is you're thinking and how it is that you're feeling, so that rather than running your mind like a program, like it's just in the morning you get up and you press on and all of a sudden the program starts running and your mind is running and it's going a million miles an hour. Mindfulness, to me, the very first step is to step back and step up and start looking at what's happening in there, because all of that chatter is something that you're unconsciously paying attention to. And in order to really get control of your reality and to understand what's driving it, you need to first of all be able to see what you're thinking consciously and subconsciously.
Explain in a bit more detail about what mindful change is all about and what you mean by that.
Change is a term that I coined. I created it back in 2005 when I opened my business. I define mindful change as a process. It's a process that I've developed that helps people take control of their reality by unlocking and then examining and then rewriting the stories that are at the source of how they experience life. Because from a mindful change perspective, if you can think of it this way, is that whatever you're experiencing out there in terms of your reality is somehow being driven from what's going on in here. So the mindful change process helps people to be able to connect with that and see what it is that they're thinking, believing, feeling, etc., that is driving the reality that they're experiencing. So like you, Debbie, people that come to me, they want to love their life. I mean, they want to be happy in their life. There isn't anybody out there that doesn't. But the people that will find their way to mindful change know that it's something about what they're thinking, consciously or subconsciously, and they just can't get a handle on it. So whether they're feeling anxious, sad, depressed, or whether they just simply feel like, hey, I keep choosing the same guy in my life and I don't know why. It's like I'm on repeat. Or I keep attracting the same kinds of people into my life, like what's going on? Or I just can't seem to get a handle on this career or whatever. They just know it's coming from in here, but they can't get down to the nitty-gritty of what's driving it. So they'll come into me and work with my system, which is unique in the sense that it works in day-long sessions. So rather than, the standard coaching, which is, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, the mindful change process brings people in at the start of the day. We uncover the story, the beliefs, etc., maintaining the problem. And we rewrite that story all in one day so that they go out differently than they came in at the beginning.
Tell us a bit more about how somebody can make a change that immense in just a day's worth of time. It seems like a very short
Absolutely.
time for that to happen. But like I say, it is possible. It does work. But can you explain how that happens?
Sure. Well, the first thing that has to happen is you need to be able to shift how you see reality. And for those of us that wake up to the idea that mind and reality are linked, the next thing that you need to accept is that your reality is not as solid as what we've been taught to think it is. So we think of reality as being out there. So there's a person, there's a circumstance, there's events, there's things in your life, etc. So we've been taught to think of it like it's real, and we've been taught to think as if it's separate from us. Well, what metaphysics and quantum physics know is that that's incorrect, is that we actually are interacting with a very sophisticated simulation. I call it a virtual reality. And what's driving it is the script called our mind, or the script of our emotions. That's what's driving the virtual reality. So just like in a simulation or a game, when you don the goggles and the gloves of the game, you suddenly start interacting with that virtual reality. Well, it's the same thing in life, is we're interacting with a virtual reality. And depending on how we think, how we feel, and how we behave, our simulation will respond to us accordingly. So that you maybe notice that when people are very fearful or anxious or upset, is that when they come into life that way, they'll usually have a super bad day. Like wherever they go, drama shows up. And the reason that that's happening is because they're not actually, reality is not separate from them. It's just mirroring back to them what they're putting out. So that we become like a TV tower. And whatever we're thinking and feeling and projecting into our world is what is coming back to us as the virtual reality that we interact with. So that if this is the case, then when you change the script, which can be changed, it's just like writing. Well, Debbie, you come from the field of film. You understand that, a producer or whatever gets a script, and then you make changes to the script, and that will change whatever happens on the screen. Well, the exact same thing happens in terms of the mind, is that when we understand the story or the script that we're running in here, and we change it such that the mind accepts the change, all of a sudden we're projecting a completely different script. And we're rewriting, relationships with people, we're rewriting what we're experiencing in life. It's amazing, actually, because it can work that fast.
And do you find that there's a particular similarity in what clients come to you for, or are they different? Do they vary? Heather, so you talked a bit about your process. Without naming any names, can you give us an example or two of how your process has changed your clients' lives?
I'm going to share with you a story about a woman named Carol. That's not her real name. And I will disguise the details of it somewhat, but you'll get the gist anyway. So Carol came to me because she couldn't stop crying. So, it was to the point where she couldn't even go to work because she couldn't stop the tears that just would not subside. So she came to me for a day, and so you sit down and I have a conversation to be able to go back into the story of the tears. So think of tears like the top of an iceberg. It's a symptom, okay? And we know that there's other things linked to the system. So I have a system, or I have a way of being able to question the person, to be able to probe beneath the symptom to find out what happened to her that created the situation of such intense sadness that she could not stop crying. And when you probe something like tears and ask the right questions and ask, when was the first time that I felt this type of sadness? Then what happens is the mind starts to build a timeline. It starts to build a timeline of events that happened to her that created the intense tears that she was experiencing in my office that day. And so it's little stuff like it turned out to be a really poor relationship with her father growing up. And the other things in her life besides these intense tears, her life today, was extremely poor relationships with men who were in positions of power and authority in her life, like her husband or her boyfriend or the manager of her store and things like that. So the tears were just one symptom, of a story that she held deep down that started in childhood with a really bad relationship with her father. And most children, all they ever wanted was love and respect from their parents. And so when one or the other parent does not love and respect them, it causes them to develop low self-esteem. And then, they believe that they're unworthy of love. They think there's something wrong with them. And that was the story that was built in childhood. That if you looked at her life, she kept building that same story in time and time again of I'm not worthy of love by men. The interesting part was she had a great network of friends, so there was no problem with people like her peer group. She had a great relationship with her mother and stepfather, but with her husband, the boyfriend, with her the manager in her store, she could not develop healthy relationships with them. They were all built on the need for them to love her and their inability to do so. It's like she got trapped in the story of her childhood where her father didn't love and respect her, and then every significant male relationship after that mirrored the same problem over and over and over again. And you can see the timeline go right through her life. Does that make sense, Debbie?
Oh, absolutely. And so through your process,
Okay.
he was able to stop that process going?
Yes. Yes. She resolved it. So, and resolving it is about, if you can think of the core belief holding the story in place was, I'm not worthy. Like I've done something wrong. There's something wrong with me. And there were many complex things about her that she was, I want to say, disrespecting and disregarding. So putting that all back together, think of it like Humpty Dumpty has to come all back together because self-esteem has been cracked apart through repeated interaction with a father that has given her the message that she's wrong for being herself, that there's something wrong with her, that it's not lovable, she should be strong in other ways, and blah, blah, blah. So it's like Humpty Dumpty. She's all fractured in there. So the process is about putting those pieces back together in her adult brain so that at the end of the day, she's not some fractured child, but at the end of the day, her emotions are that of the adult woman that she is. So that's what we did in her day. But the interesting part is how quickly it affected her reality. Because when I said to you that life is a virtual reality, that's the coolest part. Is sometimes there are spontaneous things that happen in a moment that change everything. So coming out of process, she was feeling much better. She went back into her job, and the first thing she did was have a communication with her manager to say, you are never to speak to me that way again, because if you do, I'm out of here. Okay, that was number one. But the most cool thing is that within a week of her returning to work, the tears had stopped, she was fine. The two other managers that had been a problem for her, they just suddenly left the store and she was no longer involved with them. It's like they disappeared from her life because she no longer had a need for that type of relationship with a male. And so they just moved off. And that's not the first time that kind of thing happens, but it's the spontaneous shift in your reality that when you really heal, I call it, heal those fractured thoughts about yourself and bring them back into loving alignment with who you are, all of a sudden your world starts to show you different things, and in this case, her world showed her, her loving respect that she now had for herself, and her world instantly changed.
We're talking about mindful change with my guest, Heather Elliott.